afternoon. I hope you're enjoying your lunch. I'm Denise Gallucci. I am the Chief Exec of GEMS Americas and the Education Partners. I'm joined by my very good friend and colleague, Andreas Schleicher, who is the Director of Education and Skills at the OECD. This afternoon, we would really like for you to enjoy your lunch. So we're just going to talk and pretend as if you're not clicking. So enjoy your lunch. Don't worry about it. If you need to, turn your chairs. If you don't have a good seat, can't help you with your seat, but we'll try. We'll try to be as engaging as we can. We're going to have a little bit of a conversation, and then we're going to turn it over to you so that you have the opportunity to ask any questions that you may have of Andreas. Typically I'm asked to interview folks and moderate because I'm provocative. But this time it's really going to be hard for me because I don't know if there's a bigger fan of Andreas's work than me. So I did send an email to some folks who question Pisa, and so we'll have some good questions, but they don't come from me, just so you know. So we do know the brilliance that you represent. You're an incredibly brilliant man who I think has changed the world in the way we look at education. But who's the man behind Pisa? Who's Andreas?
I don't know. It's always hard to find out about yourself, I think. I've always been curious. I always wanted to improve education. I wanted to find out about education and work on the methodologies to do this. There's a lot of patience. There's a lot of resilience in a world that actually, wasn't that interested in this at the outset. But I sort of try to make it work. Won a lot of friends, a lot of colleagues around the world, and a lot of enemies too.
No, I don't think so.
But
so you do a ton of charity work, and you've helped a lot in Japan. And one of my colleagues is actually also on a project that you are working on. Would you mind telling folks about some of the work you do around the world?
Yeah,
outside of Pisa.
Yeah, that's a good example. In fact, I visited by chance. I had a meeting in Japan in July 2011, 3 months after the earthquake, and I had a day free. And so I asked.
You had a day free.
Yeah, that was very, very rare, actually. And so I went to visit the area. Went to Fukushima, Iwate, and I was deeply impressed by the people I met. I met lots of teachers, mayors, people who wanted to reconstruct the region and the area. And I actually must say, I've never before seen this kind of energy. Most of these people would have the money to leave that place and go to Tokyo, everywhere life is nice. But they actually decided to stay there, rebuild the education system. And whatever they said was, wherever I went, they said, we don't want to rebuild the old education. We want to really build a 21st century school system. And so I started to work with them and actually working with the kids and the teachers, building a project around this. And the first challenge these children had, these were middle school children. There is a firewall between private and public in Japan, traditionally. And they knew, they need to break that. They need to build public-private partnerships. It was a small group of schools, and then we outlined, what would it cost to do a good project? And then they arrived at a figure about, in dollars, $60,000. And so I said, well, if you want to raise that, you have to work on that. You have to build your own strategies. You have a plan, you have a goal that's really great. I think everybody's going to like it, but you have to go out to the people, explain it. And they did, and they raised $1 million.
Wow.
And they sort of felt empowered. Actually, we can do things. The school system is us. We own the school system. We are not the subjects of, a bureaucracy. And I was actually being very, very impressed. And it's been actually, at the beginning, people laughed about it. It's now being one of the main drivers of education reform in Japan. In fact, one of the things is these school children were able to arrange a meeting with the princess. You can meet the minister, you can meet the prime minister in Japan, but you get to the imperial palace is really, really hard. They succeeded.
Yeah.
They got them out of the palace, they got them in, And I think this is really showing what's possible. And I've been and in many countries where I go, I try to actually get people on the ground involved in this, that education is not about, curricula or bureaucracies, that it's about people. And that, our education system today, our schools today, our economy, our society tomorrow. And I really try to invest myself personally in this, and that's really, I think, what drives me to do my day job.
So invest yourself personally. I think someone who's very close to your work, sees that in everything that you do. And we talk about PISA now as if it's always been. And it's actually relatively new. So what's been the journey to this PISA assessment, and how did you get countries to sign on?
Yeah, it's a really good point. Actually, I joined the OECD many years ago, and my first meeting was one where there were 23 ministers of education sitting around a table, and each one saying, we've got the greatest school system in the world. And if we have a little problem left, last year we put a reform in place to solve that. There was no aspiration to work with others, to learn from others, to actually improve. It was actually quite sort of, and that was the moment where I really thought we got to do something about it. And the only way we change this is to create a mirror in which people can see themselves. When you look into the mirror, you not always like the picture, but the only way to actually improve it is to actually see the reality. And that was the origin, really. Getting countries on board was really tough. The first time I presented a proposal, we got 5 countries who were actually strategic enough to see the value. But the OECD has 34 countries.
Right.
And everybody else said, this cannot be done, this shouldn't be done, or, you shouldn't be doing it. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of resistance.
Holding up the mirror is a very scary thing.
And it would, even my own colleagues laughed about it, because it would have commanded about 10 times our then budget for education. OECD had not much, education was just a very small, tiny sector. Actually, when we demonstrated that it can be done, it became a lot harder for people to resist it. And when enough countries had signed up, everybody wanted to be part of it. Mm-hmm. And I think what people have understood that this is not another layer of accountability. It's actually a tool for improvement. And the change PISA has leveraged in many countries, not in all. Some countries have done nothing with those results. One has to be frank about this too. But many countries did. And if you think about the economic value of that improvement alone, it's, a million times. It's many million times as much of what has been invested in this. It's been in education, we lack good metrics of success. Mm-hmm. We value education systems by how much they spend on education. Higher education is still an area without a PISA, We value universities by their reputation, by what other people say. We have no idea whether, what people pay in tuition is in any reasonable relationship with what you get there. And that's the change that we have really now in PISA, that we have a metric that shows that the world is no longer divided between rich and poor countries, in educational terms. You have some of the poorest countries. Vietnam, coming out as good as Europe, that's a big lesson. Actually, for my countries, the industrialized world, it was a big lesson that 5 of the top 10 performers are outside the OECD countries, outside the OECD membership. Nobody would have guessed that. The level of improvement, many people say this is all about culture, you just can't do it. The fact that, Poland has improved, Shanghai is rising, Singapore keeps rising, Brazil is improving, shows us actually these people don't change their culture, they change what they do. And I think being able to see that has created a very different dialogue. And when ministers of education meet today, the first question they ask is, how did you achieve this? Why has your results improved faster than mine? And there's a really good dialogue now. I think it could be better, but I think it's a start.
So there's a number of people who talk about the global education reform movement as germ, and say that it's spreading and we're focused on accountability and not outcomes for children, and that these measures are punitive and you can't compare countries. What do we say to that?
Well, I think that you can compare countries and cultures and languages. I think that case has been made. I think the robustness, the methodological robustness I think is beyond question.
So in terms of statistics,
Yeah,
right?
I don't think you can, I don't worry about it. When I get those questions, I provide the answers, and I think very soon this dies down. The bigger question is, are our metrics complete? And I agree, they're not yet. For example, one of the things I'd really like to do or work more on is things like character skills, curiosity, courage, resilience, tolerance, creativity. We actually begin to get good metrics on that, but I think there's a lot more work to be done. And I think people who say, well, PISA today is only a partial picture of outcomes are right. At the very same time, what we also know is that that partial picture is hugely powerful in shaping your future. If you think about employment, social outcomes, economic outcomes, even trust in our societies is fairly well predicted by PISA scores. The absence of PISA scores doesn't imply the presence of character skills. I think we need both. We need to become better, more holistic, but I think we have a good start. And that is something the PISA metrics are evolving. And the problem that you have, the biggest critics of global metrics are people who are believing in a single ideology. They basically see, who is the biggest, and it's not just true for PISA, who is the biggest critic of brain research on learning fronts, which I think is the biggest problem. I think if we get that right, we can forget about PISA. If we really understand how learning happens. Who is opposing that? People from pedagogy, not anybody else. I think we have the same phenomenon. If you question the established ideas of your time, you've got to face that kind of problem. But I think on the statistics, I don't worry. I think, all of these questions have been tested over and over. On the question of concepts, yeah, we need to advance that agenda.
So in terms of aspirations for PISA, each generation evolves and you're able to fine-tune different metrics. What are the long-term aspirations?
Three things. I think on the first one is to become better at social and emotional skills, which we know are very important. Character, which we know are very important for individual success, not just individual, but also socially. Many problems that we have in our societies are the lack of people to see the world through different perspectives, to appreciate different ideas, different values. We need to become better at building this into a metric. This is something 2018 we're going to do, is going to start to do. Social competencies, this year we have done an assessment of collaborative problem solving, building that path further, encompassing a broader range of knowledge, skills, competencies, ideas. I mean, that's going to be one important driver. And there's a lot of work to do. I think we are far away from any notion of a kind of global framework for skills. This is, I think, what PISA in the long run could generate. The second part, equally important, is to improve the explanatory power. If you want to not only know where you are, but to actually improve, you need to better understand the mechanisms. And there are two parts to this. One is the scientific part, what are the school factors and system factors that explain success. That is half complete, I think. We are now I think research has established that quite well. The bigger question is what I sort of call the political economy of reform. Why do things that we know need to happen and can happen not happen? What is in the way, what stands in the way in the minds of politicians, practitioners, and so on. And I think getting a better understanding of the dynamic of change and the obstacles is very, very important. And there we are at the very beginning. I think you take the PISA results, we can statistically account for 85% of the performance variation of schools around the world. We pretty much know what a good school is, what a good system is. Why doesn't it happen? Why doesn't it happen at scale? That's something we've got to work harder to understand those dynamics. Now, is it, for example, the balance between the short-term and long-term? Is it the issue of, stakeholder engagement? That's the really hard question. And I don't think we even have a strategy yet for getting there.
So if we can take the results, we know it works, the how and the why is kind of the barrier.
Yeah.
Do you see it as the OECD's role to push you have the what and the why to push the how?
OECD's role, actually, to get a better understanding of what the OECD is. It's actually a quite loose network. You know, PISA has more countries outside the OECD than inside the OECD. Actually, what PISA has done, it has mobilized the world's best expertise. You know, and actually without money, really. You know, we can attract almost anyone to work on this project because it's intellectually attractive, because it's important, because it's a good value proposition. And I think that's really the heart of this, the richness. So in a sense, I'm not sure what the OECD's role as an organization in this. I see this as a global network, and the moment it will lose its intellectual power, its sort of frontier thinking, it will lose its relevance, and the OECD will lose sort of out of it. I think that's where we need to get to the how of the reform is a matter of working with the people who are implementing reforms to understand those dynamics and mechanisms. One of the things, for example, we discovered, we did a report in January this year, where we actually looked at reform trajectories. We had a very systematic assessment of, you know, what did the country do when, what was the intended policy, what was the implemented policy, what was the achieved policy. And one thing we found is only 1 out of 10 reforms worldwide makes any effort to actually build that trajectory.
1 out of 10.
1 out of 10. 9 out of 10 reforms is just one layer put on top of the previous one. And I think that's part of the explanation. If we don't have any incentives for people to actually see things through, evaluate success, it's going to be very unlikely that those things change.
So many of the conversations we've had here at the conference had to do with political agenda and term. And so how do you have reforms that go beyond a political leader's term? And I think if you look at the evidence-based results, and if we can highlight research like that, you think we can make changes?
Yeah, you know, I give you an example, actually. I wouldn't do that in public, but I mean...
This is kind of public.
Right. But it's an interesting experience. 2 weeks before the results from PISA came out, in my home country, Germany, did actually really badly on the first PISA assessment. 2 weeks before the results came out, I met the German ministers, and there are 16 of them because it's a federal system and it's not very complicated. I basically wanted to give them sort of some hints at what they need to watch out for. And they told me, oh, well, you know, this is just another study, very important, but there are other things, and, you know, we more or less have figured out what we need to do. Telling you essentially, you know, we will do nothing.
Yeah.
2 weeks later, this became the biggest educational story that Germany had seen. For weeks and months, this became the subject of television shows, media reporting, everyone talking about it.
Were you allowed to go home and visit?
No, actually, what I did after this visit to the ministers, I really realized this is the wrong strategy. You know, going top down, talking to the people in charge, isn't going to change the system. So I actually changed strategy. I actually thought, well, I'm going to go to work with the media, go to work with other people. And that has created a public demand for better education. You know, parents knocked on the doors of, you know, schools. Schools knocked on the doors of local administrations. And, you know, a week after this, the chancellor in Germany went public talking about this, saying what they need to do. They mobilized 100 billion euro, more than in US dollars, money that would have been unthinkable before, to build a universal childcare system, which, you know, was one of the pieces of the puzzle. And that tells you, you know, going top down, you cannot push a rope. You need to build a demand for education. You need to build an understanding among citizens that this is actually something that matters for them. And it's a good illustration. It's what 10 years later, the German school system at Pisa is actually markedly improved. It would never have happened if this became sort of an elitist discussion. And I think this is what we lack in education. I mean, the Chinese have this, and the Singaporeans have this. You know, what makes their system so good is that actually everybody wants a good education system. It matters to parents. The one divider, I really sort of categorization I've made in PISA is you can divide countries about how they make trade-offs between their future and their present. Now you have parents in China, grandparents in China who invest the last money in the education of their children, their future. Yeah. You look into Europe today, you know, we have already spent the money of our children for consumption today, and that's what the debt crisis really is about. So this is the kind of trade-offs, and I think building that knowledge, building that understanding that, you know, if we don't lay the foundations today, we're going to pay a very high price to this. Our schools today are our economy tomorrow. And I don't think many people have really got that message, because our societies in the past were very tolerant for low skills. You know, you could find your job, you have a decent life, you can sort of get around this. It mattered in some countries more whom you know than what you know. And that's over. I think you don't have that anymore in most nations now. The wage disparities, the earning inequalities that we see in most OECD countries, it's actually really worrying. The kind of inequality, United States is another good example for this. Rising inequalities. You could deal with this in the past through redistribution, you know, use taxes to take money from the rich, give it to the poor. It's worked up to a point. It's time that we deal with the sources of that inequality, and that's the skills of people. And I think that is not yet clear to enough people. And they find out, you know, when it's too late. You don't become a scientist or an engineer or a teacher at the age of 40, you know, if you haven't built that kind of human talent early on.
So aspirations of Pisa, one last question. So we talked a little bit about higher ed and its reputation and where students go and the kinds of jobs they get and the level of achievement that the individual brings for acceptance. So how about Pisa at 21?
Yeah, you know, higher education is a great topic for this. I think that's the last field where we do not have robust metrics. And I think it would have to be very different from PISA. In higher education, what matters is institutional performance. We don't talk about higher education systems, really. Universities compete globally, and they have no way. You know, we did a comparison of adult skills, and one of the things that we found out, for example, is that Japanese high school graduates outperform Spanish university graduates. You know, what does a university degree really mean? You know, and I think you find the same thing within countries. All what we know today is reputation and spending. Actually, if you look at the international rankings of higher education, the more money you spend, the better you appear in those rankings. That sets exactly the wrong incentives for people. But it's going to be tough, I think, because, again, the institutions that have most to lose with the biggest reputation are going to be fiercely resisting any of that. You know, the institutions that have to gain, all those second-tier universities that do a really great job, but that will never get the reputation because they don't have the selection power, they're not going to be very strong in this. And they may not just be public institutions. They may be any kind of higher education. They may not call themselves universities. They may call themselves some other kind of college. And I think to get them on board to build that is going to be really difficult. But I think it's absolutely necessary. I think we see only, when you look on the streets, you know, we have this toxic mix of university graduates looking for a job, you know, unemployed people with high degrees, and then at the same time employers telling you they can't find the people with the skills they need. You know, this cannot go on forever. No?
That was my next question. Focusing on skills and looking at the skills gap, do you think the landscape of higher education is bound to change?
Absolutely, in two ways. I mean, the one thing which is obvious now is that the world economy no longer rewards you just for what you know. Now, Google knows everything. The world economy rewards you for what you can do with what you know. And that is a big challenge for universities, that actually success of people depends on you. How can they extrapolate from what they know? Use their knowledge in novel settings. That's one of the big challenges. You cannot no longer derive your value solely from transmitting the past, which is what, you know, when you have universities, professors reading a book from 10 years ago, you know that's not what will make you successful. The other thing is that, you know, this unbundling of educational content, delivery, accreditation is going to imply huge change in the world of higher education. You know, it's going to be really about the value that you create, not who you are and what certificates you give. And I think that's going to have a deep impact on this. But again, the only way to actually achieve real change is to have a level playing field. And that relies on making success and failure visible, really. You know.
So I'm going to completely switch gears before we turn it over to you. Going back to your presentation yesterday, you talked about class size and teacher satisfaction, and class size really having nothing to do with whether or not the teacher is satisfied. It's a huge debate in the United States, and teachers, so they say, that teachers want class sizes of 15 or less, and the government invests in reducing class size. But you say behavioral differences are really the driver. So what was your research around that?
Actually, when you say teachers want smaller classes,
I say it's what's being said.
I heard the same thing. And actually, I said to myself, as I always do, I want to find out what teachers actually say. So I did the largest survey of teachers ever, taking a random sample of 90,000 teachers and actually asking them that question. I gave them very simple questions. Ask them about the job satisfaction, the class size, to make that relationship. But I also asked them simple question. If I give you $100 more, what is really important to you? Would you like to have a better salary? Would you like a smaller class? Would you have more instruction time, more time to tutor, more time to relate to your students? And actually what teachers said was very, very interesting. What teachers actually said was very close to what we find out in our research. That actually the quality of teaching, the quality of instructional environment. It was also interesting that salary didn't come first either.
I believe that.
Most teachers really cared about the instructional environment, the support they have, the time they can spend with students outside the classroom. The time they spend for collaborative professional development, all of those things came out on top. And in that sense, I think teachers, if in the difficulty that we have in our education systems, this was the first time that was ever done. I asked myself, why has nobody done that before? It's such an obvious thing. If we want to know about teachers, let's ask them. And the fact that it hasn't been done before tells us, we really are not interested. The education sector is the only sector where those who employ people have zero interest to really understand the dynamics of the teaching workplace. And I think that's a really sad part of the story. The teachers know the right answer, they give the right answer, and they show an enormous level of commitment. And the United States is a good case in point. What has been the price for lowering and lowering and lowering classes? Very poor, very poor salaries, very poor working conditions, crumbling school buildings, outdated curricula. The price that the people at the workplace pay for policies that have just been popular is absolutely huge. Finland's education system, now where you have this wonderful school buildings, this wonderful infrastructure and so on, 30% of time to do teaching outside formal classrooms is cheaper, way cheaper than the education system of the United States because they have made better spending choices.
So in terms of the behavioral concerns, I think what you will hear from teachers is that the health and human services for students aren't there. So what do we say to teachers?
I think we have to develop a much more holistic understanding of what school is about. I think this idea, school is about learning, then we have another social service, and we have the dentist. Those things it's a very old-fashioned way of government operations. We basically structure the life of students around ministry departments or government structures. And I think that's a very ineffective way of doing it. We need to get a more holistic understanding. What are the needs of students at different levels of development? I have the same reaction to, early learning in school, We say when kids become 6 years, suddenly they are ready for some form of institutions. We don't have this kind of learning and growth trajectory. And that's, again, you go to the Nordic countries in Europe. In Finland, you have social services, health services, education all integrated in one place. The school is actually the center of the community, center of society, and actually still delivers very, very high quality of learning. I think that's, and if you build this idea, again, coming back to the Japanese teacher in the Fukushima, what impressed me in these people was that they knew in this situation they were in, they needed to put a break on the academic learning. They needed to provide other support for their children, and they did. They saw really the human growth of their children as the primary concern and built everything around it. And when the situation changed, they did different things, and I think that's what we need more of.
Okay, it's time. We have people who are walking around who'll help us.
Thank you both for your time. Mr. Andrea, you mentioned the importance of sort of going bottom up and not just top down. For most people, education is sort of an investment with an uncertain return. If you think of it sort of in terms of the stock market, you're putting money in, but you're not really sure what you're getting out. There might be sort of a certain wage premium, but you're not sure you're getting it. So my question is twofold. Have you, in terms of parents, because they're really the ones making the investment in education, is OECD, has it done, will it do, is it thinking of doing something around measuring the returns to parental engagement? Sort of if parents are more engaged with their kids, what happens? The second thing is OECD, or what is OECD's thinking on educating parents as consumers about making educational decisions? Because for most parents, when you go to a school, you hear all these things about curriculum, and you know the price tag. It's not like when you're buying a laptop or another product where it's very clear what the specifications are and you can measure.
Well, actually, I think the returns to education are quite well understood. And I wouldn't worry so much about their variability. That is true for higher education and so on, but the returns to individuals are pretty robust. You almost cannot make a mistake on that investment. The average returns are high, the variability is high. But you're absolutely right. Consumers do not see the long-term returns. They see the immediate cost. And I think there's several things that you can do. Parents are a big factor in the equation, and I'm not worried about so much money and the parental education. I'm worried about, give you an example. In Pisa, we ask one simple question. How often did you ask, we ask questions, we have a parent questionnaire. How often did you ask your child, how did you do at school? And actually, that was the biggest predictor of the children's success, bigger than social background. Basically, the simple fact, I show my child what you do in school is really important to me, mattered more than, how much time I spend on the homework of my child, what family background I have, and so on. And we have actually very little of that. That's what's often missing. It's not so much the resources than the simple. Of course, I'm talking about the industrialized world here. It may have a totally different picture in emerging economies. That's the missing link often. And then as individuals, it's very hard for you to actually see the long-term returns of an education. What pathway in education is leading to what returns? University, vocational education. It's very, very hard for people to figure out. We have, for example, very little in terms of real career guidance in schools. Who's going to tell you about, the world of work, the world of learning after school, and so on. I think investing in that is very important. And then the last part that I think is really important, there is a risk. There is a risk of, not reaping those returns, and that's exactly what governments are about. They should be actually make finance. I don't think, for example, for higher education, public spend money on higher education. I don't think it's well spent. But I think the public should be responsible to ensure that every child has access to the financing, guarantee loan schemes, and all these kinds of devices. Becoming better, if you get those three elements right, I think you're going to make sure that lots of more people get better education. Maybe one fourth element is simply transparency. In a system where school quality is highly variable, parents need to know, and they don't often. Parents get very, very patchy information about the quality of learning outcomes. It's not a problem if you go to Singapore or if you go to Finland. The school quality is so uniform, parental choice doesn't really matter. If you are in a school system where actually school quality varies, giving parents the tools to do that. It's another thing we researched. In our parent questionnaire, we asked actually, what was the reason for your decision to choose this school? And I must tell you that quality came seventh. There were six other things that parents considered more important, of many of which quite trivial. And that's another illustration where we lack transparency.
What comes first?
Proximity. Proximity, my child is sort of well taken care of, a secure environment, all those kinds of things. Which are important, I agree, but you would like to see quality a bit higher up.
Stephanie?
Andreas, thank you for today and yesterday as well. So there was a Buddhist monk, Thich Nhat Hanh, who said, if you want the tree to grow, it doesn't help to water the leaves. You have to water the roots. So I'm looking for your narrative on what are the roots that need to be watered. Because if we're looking at class size, let's just call that a leaf. What are the roots, and how do we make those so clear and so compelling that people get the narrative of Pisa?
Very, very good question. I think there are roots in time, and they obviously lie in the early learning opportunities that children have. And here I don't mean primarily academic learning, but social and emotional support that young children get to sort of grow into the world of learning. This is the kind of time sequence. In terms of substance, the expectations that we place on children, why don't we see social disadvantage playing out negatively on student learning outcomes in the city of Shanghai in China? Because every child is expected to do well. There's no tolerance for failure in the system. And that is, every child knows, my investment in learning today is going to be my future tomorrow. And the system, the society has really got that message straight. And I think if you do not get the good understanding among students why they learn, it's going to be very, very hard to foster this. I'll give you an example from our recent, actually just a couple of weeks, we published a very interesting report that looked at gender differences in education. And education systems have been very successful in eliminating the performance gap in science. Girls do as well as boys in science, which was not the case 20 years ago. And then I looked at another statistics, which shows that the number of girls going into engineering is 23% of the total population. Where is this gap coming from? And then sort of to find out, really, I did a survey that didn't look at, the kind of things people do, learn, but actually the attitudes to learning. And I found that, for example, many girls do well on the science test, but they don't see science as opening life opportunities, as being relevant for their current and future careers. So those things are very predictable. Those are the roots, really, the attitudes, the aspirations that we create among students. And what I see from international comparisons, that you can actually get every child to succeed if every child understands that doing well is important. The fact that, for example, I mentioned that yesterday, students in Asia see success as a result of effort, hard work, teacher support, whereas students in many Western countries see success as a matter of talent, being sort of born as a genius. That teaches us a lot about those roots of success, because that's what's playing out many years later in life. But I think this is a very complex question. I think one would have to work a lot more on that.
You've been waiting so patiently.
No, it's all right.
Is your mic not on?
I don't know. Can you
Yeah,
hear me?
it's good.
Yeah? Okay. Hi, thank you for yesterday and today. It's really good. When PISA came out, I thought, oh my God, another testing. And then when I see the results, I find that it's really an important measurement for student performance. But I was at a board meeting for a school on Saturday. And they said, well, we don't have time for this. We are preparing for PISA because the mandate this year is all the schools in the UAE have to perform well in PISA. I said, mandate? Whose mandate is? They said, the Sheikh. He's insisting. So I'm thinking this is like your top-bottom example when you talk to the minister. Would that work? I mean, if the schools are having issues, like here, we've got issues in skills-based and, I don't know, teacher performance and teacher training, all sorts, especially if I'm looking at the public schools rather than the private schools. Why would PISA make a difference, I mean, if the students are not really living the proper conditions for education, would having them do PISA gonna change that? I don't know.
It's another good question. What I can tell you is many people have tried to train for PISA, and all of those efforts have been bitterly unsuccessful, because PISA doesn't test specific content knowledge. PISA tests the capacity of students to think creatively. You can't train that in the short term. The only thing you can do to improve PISA results is to provide better teaching, more creative teaching, teaching that allows for, project-based learning where students take initiative. It's the only way how you can improve results on this test. There is no space. Actually, many people say it's unfair. We give students the content knowledge on one page. Oh, but this is what we wanted to test. No, actually, you start with this. What we want to test is, can you use it? Can you extrapolate from it? So I think, short-term training for PISA is not really very fruitful, but actually investing in good education, good teaching, raising the stakes is important. And I think in the UAE, I actually yesterday morning I had a meeting here with the authorities, and one of the things that I think the UAE could do better is actually have a lot more expectation from what students can do. I think the current curriculum is very sort of low-pitched really still, and I think that's what PISA might be doing. It might tell people actually you're doing fine by national standards, but actually the world is moving very fast on this. But I think in terms of short-term drilling for this, you won't see results.
It could be, if I may, that there's a first step in recognition that we want to achieve, we believe our children can, and so sometimes the message as it travels down gets distorted, but that the expectation is that our children can and they should, and it's our opportunity to support them to reach that level. So I think it's a hopeful message.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
And I must actually say, the target, the PISA target that Sheikh has set is absolutely realistic. I mean, this is a rich country that Korea did it as a poor country. They moved actually even faster than that. So I think there's every possibility for the UAE to become among the top 20 countries in the world. I don't think there's anything that prevents that from happening. It's a matter of having the political will and building the capacity for doing that. And I think setting that ambition, I think is a great thing to do. But to get there, you really need to build good capacity. It's not a short-term thing.
We have.
Firstly, I feel bad for you guys that you're not enjoying this wonderful meal we're having.
Andreas did say the only deficit is that we don't have lunch.
My question for Andreas is, has PISA taken a look at, and I'm sure you have, but other industries, because we're talking about these character skills testing that we would like. Have you looked at social workers, at psychology, to get these tests produced or constructed quickly? And the second thing is, have you looked at other industries in terms of like Google? How does Google hire for creativity, or how does Microsoft, and to take that into education and be able to use it as the testing tool? That's my first question, and I'll have a second one possibly.
Yeah, but absolutely, those are our sources for inspiration. But we also have a more systematic approach to this. We actually did an assessment of adult skills, looking at the workforce in the industrialized work, and actually finding out how people use their skills. What role do those character skills actually play for people's success at the workplace? And that's sort of the more sort of empirical, more systematic source of our work on student learning outcomes now. But you're absolutely right. What you see at Google, how they actually identify, nourish those kind of creative skills, this is a great example of how to build this for our metrics.
I think we probably have time for two more.
Hi. For individual schools or students that want to benchmark themselves globally, what's the opportunity and status of a PISA for schools?
Yeah, actually, we have just done that. We actually came from the United States, and many schools came to us and saying, we know our country isn't doing well, but we want to know where we fit into this picture. And so we developed a school-based version of the assessment. It's now available, and it's revealing very interesting results. And one of the things that we did with this is we said we will not construct a ranking of schools. The school will get its own results. And it's not going to be a score. There is a score as well, but it's quite a detailed profile. Compare yourself with a school with a similar social intake. What are your relative strengths? What are your relative weaknesses? What's your disciplinary climate like? What is your kind of teacher support like? All of those kind of issues are surveyed there, and it's available. And the one thing that interested me most was when we were finished with the first pilot, we had only 300 schools to just test this idea out. We said, okay, we're going to invite the schools to learn from their experiences. And they were invited to Washington by a charity. And 300 schools took place. 285 principals from across the United States came to attend that meeting, which showed actually their interest was, and these were, not just, elite schools. There were a lot of really kind of schools with a lot of problems there. These schools,
Urban schools.
Yeah, everything. It's the mix of schools is actually quite typical in the US. They wanted to know what they can learn from the world's best education system. I think this is a fascinating kind of grassroots interest that we have now in global comparisons. And the instrument is now available. I think the UK is starting this year, Spain is this year, China. So I think it's going to be hopefully taken up.
What I can say about PISA for schools is it's a non-punitive measure. And so you control the results. You can share them as you like, but it really is an improvement tool. And I think that's, in terms of standardized tests and what systems think about that, PISA for schools is different.
Actually, I must tell you,
I was a big proponent.
Our philosophy for PISA is the same. Countries are not obliged to publish their results. China, actually, for years, didn't publish their outcomes. we think that's a completely legitimate choice. This is really up for, when are you ready for that? And actually, even most of the schools that took PISA for schools did publish their results once they saw that we actually published them in relation to statistical neighbors, comparing like schools actually had no problems with that. Yeah.
Thank you. Denise? Hi.
Yeah.
Oh, Tendai, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Good.
Mine may be a silly question. PISA in Africa. Where are we? What's happening?
It's actually, I think it's been a long trajectory. I think the interest in Africa in international comparison has been pretty low so far, but we have quite encouraging signs. This year, for example, Senegal and Zambia are going to join the next round of PISA. But it's growing slowly. I think the question of relevance, for example, what we have to do in those countries, we have to get to the children out of school. PISA in Senegal is actually going to be a big innovator in PISA because they are not only going to assess the kids in school, which is only half of the population, they're actually going out to test the kids who are not in school to see actually what is the gap they need to fill. So, and I think that's the big challenge there. But so far, governments in African countries, the way PISA works is, we don't go out to countries. The countries express an interest. And so far, that interest has been just quite limited. But we have, Morocco, Tunisia, and Northern Africa have always done PISA. But I think Zambia and Senegal are the first ones in more central regions that are taking the challenge, really.
So we come to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the way it works. It's
I
all
can guarantee Tendai will be coming to you. We have one last question.
I've got the microphone
Oh.
here, so.
Microphone is
Sorry
power.
about that. Yeah, thank you very much for the really enlightening and inspiring sort of discussion. My name is Samina Shahim. I'm a cross-cultural psychologist, and I'm really interested in the cross-cultural sort of results of PISA. I've also started the first anti-bullying campaign here in the UAE in 2010, and it's called Bolt Down on Bullying. And I'd be really interested to get your input on the fact that, yes, we need to water the roots, but there are some branches to that tree that could be ill, such as psychological and emotional damaging that happens that deteriorates a student's performance in school and academic performance. And is there a correlation between schools that pay attention more to emotional intelligence and emotional well-being and academic performance results?
As I said, we're just at the beginning of being able to measure social and emotional skill components reliably. What I can say, school bullying is quite well measured in PISA. So what I should say is that there are actually school systems that do well, like Korea, that still have a high incidence of bullying. Because the way the system works is so much pressure is put on the individual students to do well in the class that actually the dynamics are. So you can't really say, more bullying, poorer results. There's some systems that actually do well, but still where bullying is a big, big challenge.
I guess it depends what type of bullying it is as well.
Yeah, but in Korea it sometimes ends up with suicide. It's quite serious. So, and it's not academic pressure. People get that wrong. Also in Japan, in Asia, it's typically that you're excluded from your kind of school group, and those kind of things lead students to really very bad decisions. But bullying is a big outcome variable that we need to better capture. And you can see, for example, in the Western world, the social and emotional well-being of students is a very important predictor, not only for their PISA outcomes, but for what they do afterwards. The predictive power of you, for example, if schooling was a bad experience for you, later on you're unlikely to become a lifelong learner. That kind of experience is going to have real deep implications for how you work with others. And so that's, I think, the bigger part of the picture. But we're working now on a survey on early learning, where we are actually trying to develop those measures. Where are those kind of social emotional skills, bullying and so, where's the origin really?
Okay.
And I think you need to get back to the early years.
My friend.
My name is Kabir Usman from Nigeria. Based on the reflection of your presentation yesterday, it was quite obvious that a lot of the information you passed through there wasn't a lot about Africa. So I guess possibly there are challenges in quality data, and possibly that is the case. And the whole discussion between yesterday and today revolved around global education and global teacher. So if I go back to Nigeria now and somebody asks me, what's the definition of global education and what's the definition of global teacher, I don't know what answer I should give. Thank you.
I think you're absolutely right. You know, we have, our view of the world is very partial. I think we lack really many facets that we have no light yet. And I think that's going to be a big challenge. If we want to work on global education, we need to get a better picture of how the world really looks like. By the way, in our assessment of global competences of students in the PISA context, this is going to be the central question. Not, you know, do you know your own culture? Do you know your own ideas, philosophies? But actually, are you able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes? You know, are you able to see the world through different lenses, are you willing to appreciate different values, different cultures? I think many of our young people are very much challenged with this. They just don't even know that different values exist or different ideas and cultures exist. I think it's going to be a real, real challenge. But I think having robust evidence and information on this is the starting point. You know, where you do not know, you can't. It's very hard to improve what you can't measure. No?
This conference is about solutions, Global Education and Skills Forum. We said we would focus on solutions, and we need to focus on a solution for you. You're here, your country has been represented, we're hearing your voice, and individuals like Andreas can make change happen. And so we thank you for your voice and for caring about the true global picture. We thank you so much for your patience with us and your candor and your work on behalf of all children throughout the world. You are a true hero in the field of education, and certainly one to me personally.
Thank you.
Thank you.